Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the Warrant Committee tonight, and thank you everybody who came out. We have a significant number of department heads and other town leaders here. Before we begin with our agenda, I want to turn the meeting over to Mike Zulis, the chair of our school committee, for an announcement.
Thank you, Lee Michael. The Milton Public School community in our town are mourning another tragic loss this evening. A Milton High School senior, Kate Lisa Etienne, was taken from us this afternoon in a tragic accident. And I would ask everyone here to join us in a moment of silent reflection in her memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Our thoughts are with Kate Lisa's family and friends and the whole school community, and I'm sorry to hear that news. Tonight we are coming together to talk about the town's fiscal year 17 budget, including non-contingent and contingent scenarios. In the past, this meeting has sometimes been referred to as the all-day meeting or the all-night meeting, and tonight it's going to take a different turn than it has in the past because of the timing of the request that the Warrant Committee made to the Board of Selectmen, which was dependent upon the timing of storm water, which was dependent on the timing of something else. So I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I think we still will have a very productive conversation. There is basically a very short story about what the Warrant Committee's recommendation for non-contingent is likely to be. We have not voted the non-contingent budgets. We are going to vote them on Monday night, if all goes according to plan. But right now it appears as though we would not need to make any cuts in order to meet the non-contingent budgets as they were submitted from the town departments. That's not to say that we might not move something around within those budgets, but I didn't hear anything egregious from any of the department heads when they came in terms of those non-contingent budgets, and I didn't hear a lot of concern from the Warrant Committee, so I don't have any beliefs that any of those non-contingent budgets wouldn't be fulfilled under our voting on Monday night, but that's when the Warrant Committee will take up that process. Tonight, I'd like to focus on a contingent scenario, and probably everybody knows at this point that the Warrant Committee met on Monday night, went through the budgets, and voted a contingent budget of $2,857,582. and submitted that to the Board of Selectmen, and I appeared at the Board of Selectmen's meeting last night and went through in detail what would be included in that number. I will do that again tonight in a slightly briefer fashion, and then we can have a discussion about where to go from there. We are looking to the Board of Selectmen tonight to have a conversation about what they need from the town departments and the Warrant Committee in order to form their decision about whether or not they will endorse a contingent scenario, and we can have a discussion about that. So in the town fiscal year 17 contingent budget of $2.8 million, I will start at the top of this list, which is the town departments under the Board of Selectmen. There is a contingent budget request of $867,554, and the detail is down below here, so I'm going to scroll down. Included in that request is a code enforcement officer for inspectional services, an assistant town administrator for the Selectman's office, one of two requested patrol officers for the police department, a consolidated facilities maintenance assistant, an environmental coordinator and motor equipment coordinator in the DPW, an outreach coordinator increased to full-time in the Council on Aging, wage set-asides for those positions and group insurance for those positions. What is not included in this budget is a fire overtime line of $150,000, which was requested in the contingent budgets but was not fulfilled by the Warrant Committee. An assessor reevaluation, which is a new program which would move us from an annual to an every 3-year evaluation, of $35,400. A historical records restoration 10-year plan, which would require funding of $15,000 each year. That is included. General expenses under the town Board of Selectmen departments for $92,342. And a full budget request to the consolidated facilities for their project budget, listed I think as building maintenance and repairs. And then you see a list here of other items that were requested in contingent budgets under the Board of Selectmen departments but not fulfilled. They include the second police officer at the police department, a fire lieutenant at the fire department, other incentive compensation at the fire department, equipment at the police department, which may or may not be able to be fulfilled through one-time monies, overtime at the DPW, a licensed craftsman at consolidated facilities, and a junior civil engineer at the DPW. Again, we went through that in a lot more detail last night at the Board of Selectmen meeting. Is there anybody that has any questions or comments about that section of the budget? Okay. Well, then I will go through some of the other town departments that submitted contingent requests. There's 3 columns to the right, the full contingent request. The proposed cuts column is what we reduced that request by, and then the column to the right is what the Warrant Committee's recommendation is for funding these departments above non-contingent scenario. So the library would receive under this $125,933 for 2 librarians, 1 reference and 1 technology, and also additional materials. The cemetery would be receiving trees and maintenance and some funding to their general expense line for $12,436. Parks and Recreation would receive funding to move their recreation supervisor from being funded through their revolving fund over to a full-time employee, and that would free up $65,407 in their revolving fund to reallocate to other priorities that the parks have. The schools would receive $779,700, and there is a long list of priorities that the school board has voted, and we can invite the schools up to talk about this if you like, though we have heard from the schools a couple of weeks ago when we were at the high school about this. And at the $779,000 level, you can read down the right-hand side of this page. This is a subtotal for restoration of prior reductions that were made in years past for $155,000, increased learning opportunities for targeted populations for $174,000, increased learning opportunities for all students for $62,000, full-day kindergarten for $150,000, and then this note here that would require $950,000 in one-time funds in order to get the program started. This $150,000 would be an annual operating expense. And then at the bottom you can see that they start to sum to the right, so we would count down to $779,700, which would include an adjustment counselor, which would be an FTE, reducing athletic and club fees by half, reducing bus fees by $100. Anything that I mischaracterized there, or any clarification needed? No?
I think that's accurate.
Thank you. Okay. After the schools line, we have a new operating line that the Warrant Committee is suggesting, which is to fund roads through our regular budget process. We included this at the $700,000 level to get us to about the point at which we were advised that we would be breaking even with keeping up with the roads that are deteriorating in our town. For some time we've been losing ground with the roads, and the Warrant Committee has heard about it extensively for a number of years, and we thought that if there was an opportunity to engage with the citizens around an override discussion, that investing in the infrastructure of the town would be a good inclusion in that discussion. There was some discussion last night at the Board of Selectmen meeting that maybe a special purpose fund would be more appropriate for something like a roads line item, so that there isn't a push and pull and stress on a roads budget item if you get into a future scenario like you always do with municipal finance, where as years go on from an override and you need to start cutting budgets, if you get to the point where you might need to cut staff and where you're funding roads at a $700,000 level, maybe there would be constant stress to reduce that $700,000 funding in order to avoid from cutting staff. So that was a potential problem that Tom Hurley identified last night that we can discuss. Of course, there's the contribution to stabilization funds, $306,552. And again, the total suggested override from the Warrant Committee, $2,857,582. So we submitted this to the Board of Selectmen. I appeared at the meeting last night. We talked through this, and Tom, I'd love to hear from either you and or Katie about what the process is at this point, what you need from the Warrant Committee or from the other town departments in order to come to a recommendation.
Okay. I guess the Board of Selectmen are concerned. Now, in terms of process, first of all, let me say, the Warrant Committee has every right to bring a contingent, non-contingent budget forward, with or without our approval. So you have that right. Town meeting then will vote it up or vote it down. So if that's what you decide to do, that's certainly, like I said, you certainly have that right. I guess, talking to some of the department heads we've talked to, and I'll ask, somebody from the school committee to come up and confirm, we're just not sure that it is the right time to do it. And not that we don't think that these things are all needed, but we fear that it just doesn't stand a chance of passing. And that's our big concern, that it really doesn't. It's going to be hard to mobilize people. And I don't know, Mike, if you want to, not put you on the hot seat, but I'm going to put you on the hot seat.
But you will.
I guess your thoughts in terms of being able to mobilize, the school committee being able to mobilize support by parents and PTO groups and whatnot.
So I can't speak for the school committee on that, because the school committee as a body doesn't have a position on whether we're able to mobilize
Okay, on
parents.
your own thoughts, I guess,
The school
yeah.
committee, acts by votes, and we don't act by that kind of thing. So in terms of our impressions, we don't have any data. We haven't taken any polls. What we know is just our based on our impressions, based on anecdote. And so you can take it for what it's worth. From my perspective, having spoken with parents at meetings and some in the parent community, but not as much as others, my impression is that it's a mixed view. Anecdotally, when we met with 25 to 30 parents and presented our contingent, non-contingent budgets, we had comments such as, well, it's better this year because there are no staff cuts with the non-contingent budget. On the other hand, there were many parents pointed out the necessity of the things on that list, such as math specialists and RPE and health for 45 minutes for elementary schools. So my perception is that it's mixed. I don't know, as I sit here, how strong it would be. I don't know of any group or person who, at this point, has taken charge of this thing in the parent community and would be willing to take this and take it to heart. But that's not to say that it won't happen, and that's not to say that it's not very early. It's late in the process, but not much time has elapsed since this reality set in.
Right.
About 3 weeks ago.
Since we voted on Monday night.
Well, exactly. So my impression is that it's mixed, but that is my impression based on no data and based on anecdotes. So that's what it is.
Okay. So I guess, overall, that's our concern. I think if the Warrant Committee does decide to bring it forward, we certainly will well, we'll have to take a vote on, in terms of whether to support it, but we haven't voted on it, but, you know, I personally wouldn't do anything to try and undermine it, let's put it that way.
That's good to know, Tom.
Yeah, because I think it is needed. I can't go over the road thing with you, you know, and my thoughts on what to do with the roads. But I think if you are gonna go forward with an override and you have roads in there, the better way to fund it, and you can fund it within one article, would be to make the $700,000 for roads a special purpose stabilization fund, funded with the override money. That way, it could not be invaded for, you know, other uses. So that would protect it. We're also very concerned in this, in this contingent budget that's been put forward, that the overtime to the fire has been cut. You know, we've done a study over the past 5 years. Overtime has never come in less than $425,000. And, you know, on average, that's what it runs. And right now, because of the new contract that you know, was negotiated for the fire last year, which was a fairly healthy increase, that $400,000 is not going to buy as many hours anymore because the wages are higher. So it's.
So I'm hearing from you that you're not yet ready to embrace the idea of an override, but you'd like our override request to be higher.
No, I didn't say that. I did not say that. I think it should be maybe reallocated. But, and like I said, you know, it's your right to bring it forward. You know, that's all I can say at this point.
It obviously would be good if we had the support of the Board of Selectmen, or at least the opinion of the Board of Selectmen, because I think that that is the kind of thing that would start to get somebody in the parent community, or just the community in general, regardless of parents, because there's a lot in here that isn't just the schools,
Yep.
obviously.
Yep.
So if you're going to mobilize the community around an override,
Then
I
everybody
think
has to support it.
the lack of, you know, knowing where your leaders are is
Right.
going to create uncertainty.
I mean, everybody I've talked to so far, you know, outside of the Warrant Committee has had real concerns. I can tell you that. You know, I've talked to different people in the school side, and they're not, again, not that it's not needed, but just that it just doesn't stand a chance in passing. You know, and there's just a lot of concern about that. And what's worse, a no override or a failed override, you know, because the other alternative is, you know, now we've got a good idea of what we need, what the budget's lacking, and to go forward another year and really hammer that home and go for one in 18 that would either include that stuff, or, you know, if we get fortunate, you know, it would work its way into a budget. I suspect it won't, but you know, I think that would be a better approach, personally. Your thoughts, Katie?
Can I
Yes,
add a few
please.
words to that? You, Michael, thank you. No, if I could maybe just go over this. Thank you, Michael. As Tom said, we haven't actually voted a position on this, but we were all at the joint meeting with the Warrant Committee and the School Committee and the Library Department and some others a couple of weeks ago, and there was some concern voiced at that meeting about the political will for passing an override. You've probably talked about this at other meetings, but it's probably important just to step back for a minute. Last year, the Board of Selectmen, the School Committee, the Warrant Committee had a plan that we came up with where we were using some free cash last year for operating purposes, with the idea that we were 5 or 6 years at that point since an operating override. We knew that we were going to be having to go out some point soon, and we thought it would be this year. There was consideration of it last year, and we thought we'd put it forward this year. I think the things that have changed recently that, in addition to the opinions expressed at the joint meeting and in some conversations that I've had, it sounds like Tom's had and others have had offline, with elected officials or employees or department heads in other departments, we've had an increase in state aid. We've had an increase in new growth. We also had some health insurance savings. And then the stormwater article, which Tom and Joe Lynch really spent an awful lot of time working on, and it passed at the February meeting, that has created quite a savings in the budget, because it's going to be transferred into a fee, and will be handled through the water and sewer billing rather than through the tax levy. So some of those factors have changed the picture that we've been looking at. And then I think a month ago, we all thought we were going full steam ahead on putting forward a contingent budget. Some of those changes have, I think, given some pause or some need to reflect on whether we think that combined with where we may be at in the political climate, whether there's a reason to revisit that. So I think that's where we're coming from. But again, we met with Lee Michael last night. We went through the contingent request. We did have some discussion about the fire needs. But beyond that, really, it was just a joint meeting that we were at with you, where we heard some other concerns, and that's really been the extent of our discussions on it. But, Tom and I both served on this committee. We're always grateful for all the work that goes in with the Warrant Committee, and the Board of Selectmen wants to support the Warrant Committee, but I think we want to be upfront with you about what some of our concerns are and some of the views that we've heard from various departments. So it's entirely up to this board to look at it from a financial point of view and decide what the needs of the town are and what to bring to town meeting. And I think we would support you in whatever you should decide on that. But we want to bring to you what we think maybe some of the outside concerns are, that this committee may not focus on as much as some of the other boards and committees do. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think I'd echo that.
One thing that I would say is that I do agree that some of the revenue funding has changed in the last couple of months. But one thing that hasn't changed is the long list of needs that has been building up for the last 6 or 7 years.
Yep.
And this list includes a lot of accumulated needs and a lot of requests that have been before this committee and denied year after year. And so I wonder how long you wait for it. We did come to some sort of a powwow agreement last year that this was going to be the year for the override, and now, Tom, I hear you say maybe next year's the year for the override. But how long do you ask the fire department to get by with what you ask them to get by with, and how long do you ask the police department to get by with 2 less police officers and the schools to not have whatever it is that the schools need? We made cuts last year. Or are they basically becoming permanent now if we don't go for the override this year, or permanent until we eventually go for an override? And I understand your point, Tom, about maybe we'll be able to add this to whatever we need when there's a future override, but I think what you get when there's a future override depends on what your needs are at that point and how big the number can be. You'll have to reprioritize, and some of this stuff will fall off, because I doubt that the appetite for a future override, which will be more years out from the last one, will be large.
Yeah, undoubtedly, some of the things might. You're right, it would have to be reprioritized.
I think what I heard from Katie in terms of a potential path forward is that the Warrant Committee formulate their recommendation for the warrant. We certainly voted a recommendation for a contingent budget to the Board of Selectmen, but on Monday we'll probably come together and vote our non-contingent budget, and we could at that point take up a conversation about what we want the warrant to say in terms of contingent. And it seems like you would wait to weigh in until we got to the town meeting time when the warrant was out.
Well, you were posted for meeting now. We could discuss it here. We haven't really had that discussion that we could schedule it for a future meeting. We don't have David here tonight. He had another commitment, although I think Anne Marie can speak to his thoughts on this. Want to do that, Anne Marie?
Sure, make him go first since he's not here.
Mr. Burns really did want to be here tonight, but he has had a work scheduled meeting, about a month and a half ago it was scheduled, so he does apologize because he knows this is a very important meeting and he really did want to be here. I did talk to him a little bit about this afternoon, and as Katie said, let's take it back last year when we talked about how we were going to fund 16. And the 2-year plan that we talked about moving forward with, which was to use free cash for 16 and go out for an override in 17, recognizing that we've held the line for a lot of years, we've bare-bone budgets for a lot of years, and 17 was the year that we were going to move forward with an override. Now come January of 2016, and we get additional state aid, and we get new growth, and we get a group insurance budget that's level from 16 to 17. Group insurance budget usually goes up about $500,000 to $750,000 a year. Then we get the stormwater utility. We back out the stormwater utility money, and so we've got an additional, unanticipated, unforeseen, almost $2 million. And what did we do? We were able to balance a non-contingent budget without one staff reduction on the town and on the school side. So is there pain? Yes, there is still pain. Is the level of service what we want to give the residents of this town? No, not really. But we're able to perform for one more year. Let's look at a non-contingent budget for 17 with the understanding that we definitely have to go out in 18, because we won't see in 18 this unanticipated revenue that we saw this year. I doubt we'll see another stormwater utility or another one of Tom's ideas that takes more money out of the operating budget, and we don't know about new growth. But I think that, as Katie and Tom said, you know, to run an override, it's a strategic balance, and there really has to be some pain associated when you're running an override. You know, you have to have 20 positions in the school, 5 firefighters, 6 police officers, you know, shutting down certain departments. There has to be something that people grab onto and run with and really rally around. And it's not there right now. And so I talked to David Burns about this afternoon, and his feeling is, let's try to, you know, pick up our boots for the one more year, go with a non-contingent, and all of us embrace and get behind an override for next year.
Did Dave happen to mention to you what he would think if the warrant committee went ahead with a contingent recommendation anyway?
We didn't talk about that, but that I'm just relaying his feelings, and he would do whatever his colleagues, it will be, I'm sure, once he talks with his colleagues in a joint meeting, he will,
And again,
he will
you know,
support whatever they want to.
The one thing I can say is, you know, it's been a long-standing position of all elected and appointed boards to support one another. So, you know, and that's something that I think we all hold sacred. So, you know, it would, you know, again, we haven't voted it, but it would be very difficult for the Board of Selectmen to disrespect another board.
Absolutely. There's a lot of time. Believe me, I know. I sit with Ted for many hours, Amy and I, and go over numbers upon numbers. We bring Glenn in. I know the amount of time that all of you, so please, I am not discounting, you know, your recommendations, your thought process. But I just caution that, you know, it's
You're
not
Anne Marie
there.
right now, not Dave, right?
Yeah, it's just not there. It's not there this year. That's my feeling. If you'd ask me my feeling, Anne Marie, Town Administrator, I think that we just, you know, we pull it together for one more year, and in October, we start the educational campaign at that time.
Katie, anything else? I want to ask the warrant committee if they have any comments at this point.
I have a question. I wish I could have put a graphic up about this, but I went over to see Joe Lynch today at the DPW. And John Thompson drew me this diagram of what happens with roads. And this sounds to me like an opportunity. It tells a story about you don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish with the roads. This is an issue that Darnell Thompson kind of educated me on, but he's been bringing this up a lot.
Turner.
That's okay.
Turner, yeah, sorry. I'm nervous because I'm on TV. And I have a horrible looking graphic here.
It is. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
I was looking for the stick people.
So I'll tell you what this is saying is that this is time going out this way, and this is the condition of a road. 0 is a road that's washed out and not there. 100 is a road you just paved. And what I learned today is that with proper maintenance, you can extend the life of these roads
Absolutely.
out 50 years. And now I learned that the price of oil, which is a big component of road building supplies, is very low.
Sure.
So you might at least consider a thing like this where, you know, sooner we get on this and make a plan to attack this road problem, I think you could absolutely sell that to people. This is being smart with your money. It's a wise use of resources to attack this problem now, come up with a plan to get the roads in shape. And there's the other way you can go is you can say, once roads, about 7 years out, they hit a point when you gotta fix them because you don't want water getting underneath them. And they go down fast at that point. And then they get to a point where they're like, well, you can wait forever and have just, axles breaking all over town, one year after the other. But I was kind of convinced that this is a thing that if people got behind, if the leadership of the town got behind, we could probably tell people, hey, let's fix the roads. And let's get a smart plan. Let's be smart about our money. And I can send a nicer graphic later if you want.
Well, I mean, to a degree, you're preaching to the choir, because we certainly agree with you. The roads are, we all know what the condition of the roads are, they're horrible. And we don't have enough money going to them. On the capital committee, we throw as much money as we can at it. We've thrown more money at it this year. There was some talk, because we freed up $500,000 of bonding capacity by moving stormwater off into, because there was about $500,000 a year that was going into the sewer, the storm drain project. And we had talked about putting that towards roads, and
300,000.
then,
It's 300,000.
yeah, that's all we could do this year was 3. But, 3's better than none. We still got that in abeyance right now, and the reason we do is because there's also funding for the DPW break room. Right now, that was engineered with maintaining the roof that is currently on that is 20 years old. It's a rubber membrane roof that is way beyond its useful life. And we're not sure what that's gonna cost, so there's a concern there. Do we wanna spend $400,000 or $500,000 or more on that break room to have the roof leak? So that's a concern. But, so we're still waiting for an answer on that before we really know what's left at this point.
There's no question, Mike, that there are some real needs that would be addressed through this contingent budget. We recognize that. I mean, a couple of the positions, the assistant town administrator is a key position. We're going to have a new town administrator coming in with a lot more authority and power than the town administrator currently has. And the office is really understaffed because the current assistant town administrator is doing completely human resources work and health insurance benefits. A lot of that has been transferred into that role from the treasurer's office. So that's a big need. There are other needs in public safety. The zoning officer is a key position. So there's a lot of needs that we aren't meeting now that we could meet through the contingent budget. I think what you're hearing from us is caution based on feedback we're getting from some other elected officials and from just some other interested parties in town or department heads. But we certainly agree with you that there's a lot of needs that we could address through the contingent budget. The question is without this current staff cuts, for us from a political question looking at it, is it more likely or less likely to pass? And then if you have an override that doesn't pass, how does it impact? How is that viewed by the bond rating agencies and other stakeholders? So those are issues that we would be thinking about in terms of the question you presented to us about whether we would think this is the right time to go forward with them. But we certainly recognize the need.
Whereas this is a different kind of override than replacing jobs that are at risk, this is more like an advancement override.
Yep.
I wonder if that would be viewed differently by the bond rating agencies if it weren't to pass. Because it's not to fulfill a current budget need that's not being met. So it's an obligation that's not being met. It's to create additional capacity, I wonder if there's a difference there.
I don't know the answer. I mean, there may be. I mean, I can see your point. They might look at it differently. The obvious fear is, that they're just going to look at it as an override, and just, they're looking at the will of the people to fund. And, that being said, you know, we've done a very good job over the past few years of building our reserves to levels that they've never been at before. And more so than the overrides, that does help. You know, you know, we had an abysmal, you know, ratio of operating budget to fund balance.
Years ago.
Yeah, and it has dramatically improved, and that's, you know, to the credit of this committee and everybody that's worked so hard to do that. So, I mean, I can't answer the question. I don't know how they look at it, but.
Well, not seeing any other questions right at the moment, I'll ask another one. Oh, go ahead.
Go
Phil.
ahead.
I'll agree it's not exactly fair to ask you about how you would weigh in on something next year, but let's say next year we still have the same long list of needs, but we don't have many cuts that we're facing. We probably could eke by in fiscal year 18 with non-contingent budgets with relatively small adjustments. Do you think that your attitude would be the same and we would put it off another year? I wonder when do we take the step to move the town forward? Is it only when you have a dire burning platform of needing to make cuts in your non-contingent budget?
And I guess, you know, whether that's this year or next year, I kind of look to, you know, what is the mentality out there? You know, what's the will of the people that are supporting it to really mobilize behind it? And I think that is really the key.
So do you think timing was an issue this year? Because I don't know how we would have more people mobilized yet when we just made the recommendation and the board of selectmen
Yeah,
hasn't weighed
I
in.
think we're getting the feeling that there just isn't that will out there right now. And it's just a feeling, obviously. You know, we haven't asked anybody, really.
Yeah.
You know, some of the feedback that I'm getting from people in the community when talking about this issue is, their retort back to me is, well, we already had a mini override. You moved stormwater out of the operating budget, so that to me is an override already for this year. So I do believe timing is everything, and I do believe the message is everything. And while I agree with Katie and Tom that this list, believe me, we need everything on this list. I'm just concerned about the political pulse, the political will out there, that's all.
I think the other problem we have too is, I mean, we all recognize we have a structural deficit. There's year by year, there's never enough revenue to meet, there's never enough revenue growth to meet the growth in the operating budget.
Right.
You know, it just goes without saying. And I personally think that we have to be able to show the voters that we've done everything we can to try and curb that structural deficit or correct that structural deficit, you know, with consolidation, with reorganization, with regionalization. We've turned over every rock that we can to do it, and I'm not sure we're there yet. I'm not sure we've done those things yet. You know, I think we're looking to, you know, not only the selectmen, the warrant committee, the government study committee, but everybody to kind of rally behind those kinds of changes. To say, hey, look, we've done everything we can do. You know, there's just not another way to consolidate. There's not another way to regionalize, and we still have needs. And here's what they are. And I think that's an easier thing to sell.
I'm going to go to Phil in just a second, and then I'll come back to Ted, but I want to recognize that there are a lot of town leaders in the room and a lot of folks who put a lot of time into contingent budget requests. And if there is somebody who has a comment that they want to make or want to ask a question, then I'll invite folks up. So if you want to ready a question, I will invite folks up as well. Phil?
Yeah, I have a quick question for the Board of Selectmen and a question for the school committee. Question for the Board of Selectmen is there any number below the 3.8 million at which you feel the political dynamic would change?
Do you mean below the 2.8 million?
The 2.8, yeah.
I think there are certain things on that list that have a better chance than others. I think roads has a better chance than others. It's just a gut feel. I think free kindergarten has a better chance than others. You know, so there are certain things on there that might have better chances than others, but you know, and we brought that up before, and, you know, it's not fair, and it can be very divisive to do something like that, you know, to,
You're not going to say that word again.
no. Menu.
Oh, please.
I don't think we can really answer that, Phil. You know, I mean, I've talked to a few members of the school committee, the library trustees, and just to get to take the temperature of what some other folks are hearing and seeing and what their thoughts are. I don't know that we can say that a number lower than what the Warrant committee is recommending. There's, again, if you were to do something, there's already needs that are important that are not included in the $2.8
That's right.
million number, so, I don't know. That's about all I can.
And my question for the school committee is, I want to come back to full-day kindergarten. We're up against it as a committee in terms of time right now. We're going to have to start making a decision about what kind of budget we want to recommend. And if we go with a non-contingent budget, we're currently holding aside many hundreds of thousands of dollars to supplement the 150 that you were looking to fund with the override. And unless you can give us some pretty good indication that you could find that money some other way, we're gonna have to reappropriate that other money to other uses, and we're gonna have to do it relatively quickly. So I don't know what our drop dead date is for those kinds of notifications, but, and I know you've answered the question in the past, but I wonder if you would take it up again among yourselves and think about it and get back to us with a final decision.
The question, Phil, about whether other cuts could be made.
Mike, could you
Oh, sorry.
come closer to a microphone?
That's the hot seat. You can have it just a minute. The specific question, Phil, being,
Could you find in your $40 million budget,
Yeah.
$150,000 to leverage $900,000,
Yeah.
and then $700+ thousand every year going forward from the state to fund full-day kindergarten?
so it's a $43 million budget, but as you all know, it's a very tight
I
budget.
rounded down.
Yeah, all right.
Before you answer,
Yep.
let me maybe throw you a lifeline, because that number might be a little bit smaller, given a comment we heard the other night. Do you want to talk a little bit about the number that you came up with in terms of energy savings?
Well,
Well,
Glenn,
I'm aware of that, yeah.
you're aware of that?
Yeah, so.
Are you
so-
ready to quantify that?
So
Okay.
our understanding on energy savings is, on the school side, it appears we would save $50,000 in FY '17 and then $100,000 in FY '18, just the school side. So you'd have an equivalent amount on the town side. So jump up if I get that wrong.
We're just chastising.
Okay, but jump up if I get that wrong. So, so that's what it looks like based on the new rate lock, the new contract and the rate lock. So, so with that, that narrows the gap. It has been suggested to me that although no one likes to use free cash for operational reasons, if perhaps we split the difference on the 150, and you all found 75 this year, and we were able to find 75, and then we could make up 50 out of our rate lock, that narrows the gap significantly, and then that increases to 100 next year, so it makes it a little easier to, so it's not an ongoing commitment, right? Because the rate lock increases, or the savings on the energy increases from 50 to 100 the next year, so it's not an ongoing issue, or it's not an ongoing requirement. So it seems to me that there's some room to find a solution there, among reasonable people.
Okay.
Betty?
I just want to echo that, I was on the Warrant Committee 20-plus years ago. We had negative free cash. I mean, I think some people are surprised to hear that, and I didn't even understand what free cash was back in those days. I was trying to get my head around it. But, I don't know what next year's going to look like. I don't know if we're going to get enough free cash. I think it would be a sin, and I hate to use that word, it's not a religious word, but it would be a sin, I think, to walk away from the opportunity of using that free cash amount to get this kindergarten program running, and then being able to get the state to reimburse us going forward. I think that should be, to me, if we do nothing else, and I know that the needs everywhere are great. I live in this town, I drive these roads, I talk to department heads, I've listened to people's pain, I go to the library, I know how crowded it is. You know, if you have a fire or an emergency at your house, you want a quick response, you want the police to be there. I mean, there are huge needs. I'm sad that we have to be in an emergency of laying people off to be thinking about, not thinking about an override, but to me, I think the kindergarten is so important, and maybe also because I work in an elementary school, I can tell you by sitting in a classroom for 15 minutes who had full-day kindergarten and who didn't, just because of the way that they're not ready for school. And I think, you know, our tuition is higher than most area tuitions, but we're only a group of a handful of people, communities that don't have it. I think we really got to get this done this year. I don't want to wait.
And my colleagues can jump in if they wish, but I will observe that there are very few times in life that you can pay $150 to get $950.
The Warrant Committee has not discussed this possibility, but I will say that I am very dedicated to the idea of free full-day kindergarten in this town, but I am not excited about the idea of using one-time funds to get it started, because those one-time funds may or may not be there next year, and it's not good practice. However, there may be a different scenario that the Warrant Committee could pursue, in that we've recently heard from the Blue Hills Vocational School that there might be some operating funds difference there where we could save about $50,000. And I wonder if the Warrant Committee were to vote to come up with an additional $50,000 for the schools in a non-contingent scenario, if you'd be able to find that $50,000 and add it to your energy savings and come up with your $150 for fiscal year 17.
That certainly narrows the gap, so.
That should equal $150,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, yeah. Is that, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I looked at the projected savings and, you know, based on Glenn's comments the other night, and so I kind of had a different result than 50,000.
Okay.
If I recall, Glenn, you said that Bill Ritchie's has negotiated something new that cut it from 11 to 8.6 cents per kilowatt, which would be a 22% reduction.
We, last Friday, signed an agreement for both electricity and natural gas. The number I quoted the other night was electric, because I remembered it off the top of my head. This year, we're paying something on just under 11 cents per kilowatt, and this would bring it down to about 8.6. Bill had worked with our direct energy provider and was working on a savings over the 2 year that we were locking in the rate. This is a rate lock that was taking effect January 1st of 17, so midway through fiscal 17 for 2 years, because we're currently locked in through December 31st of 16. So it's a significant savings in the supply rate. Delivery rate is a different piece of the puzzle. So he had been working with our direct energy dealers, and they had quoted a number of Friday. When I met with you Monday, I suggested talk with Bill to get the most current number for what those savings would be. But those savings would be over basically a 2 year period of the second half of fiscal 17, fiscal 18, and the first half of fiscal 19, the way the 2 year rate lock would work in.
Great. So my math on this is that you have an electric budget of about $676,000.
Yes.
That reflects a 5% increase over a straightforward forecast of about 640-some thousand. A 22% savings on the 640,000, since you're not having a 5% increase, saves you 140,000 for the year. Half of that, because you're only getting half a year, is 70,000. You're also not going up 5%, so you're saving the 30,000 difference between the 640 and the 670. So there's 100,000 for half a year.
The supply rate
Following year ought to be 140,000.
the supply rate is only part. There's a supply rate and a delivery rate. This is a savings on the supply rate, which is roughly half of our electric bill. The delivery rate is the other half of the electric bill. So it's not a straight 22% savings on electricity. It's only on the supply portion. We purchase the supply separately from our delivery. So that's what we bid out.
This is a
So
delivery. What now?
roughly half and half.
What now? There was also some savings from gas.
Yes.
Okay?
And
And
again,
can-
I'd have to give it, the number that Bill had given me originally on Friday of about 400,000 over the 2 years was the aggregate savings to the town and the schools of electricity and gas, and he was working with our power options folks to quantify that a little more tightly. And I haven't seen that since, as when I mentioned Monday, we should check in with Bill to get the latest number on that. But that was the initial number they gave us last Friday.
We're going to be meeting on Monday to start voting the non-contingent scenarios. Could you try to powwow with Bill before Monday and maybe get back to us that day with what you think you can raise and what you would need
Sure.
in order to meet the 150 obligation for full-day kindergarten? That would be helpful. Anybody else have any questions at this point before I ask the audience for questions? Okay, there's a ton of folks here. You did put a lot of work into those contingent budget requests, and the Warrant Committee certainly believed in them and wanted to and may still endorse them to town meeting. But since you're here, I want to give you the opportunity to come up to the microphone. Is there anybody that wants to address the Warrant Committee at this point? Sure.
Good evening. You made a statement a little while ago that was interesting to me. You termed this an advancement override. And in fact, it does advance many of the departments. However, with our department, it's a cut. It's a cut in services. Next year, we will not be able to provide fire service throughout the town for the yearly basis with that cut. Now, I think we have to have a little discussion. I watched your meeting this morning. I think we have to clarify what overtime in the fire department is versus what it is in the rest of the world. I think we have to define, what injury is in the fire department as opposed to the rest of the world. I heard things said during that meeting that need to be addressed. I heard that we're not understaffed. I can tell you most assuredly we are understaffed. I could give you a half-day lecture on how we are understaffed and where and why we are understaffed. I could bring in third-party studies that would follow up with me on that all day long. I'm not here to have that discussion. I'm not seeking to move forward. We didn't come to the table in this override to move forward. We came to the table to maintain what we're providing the town right now. We weren't seeking advancement. Our staffing level, as it sits, I've termed it many, many times before this committee with different faces here, before the selectmen, for every year I've been chief, and probably many years that I was union president. I term it ground zero. We provide the town of Milton barely adequate public safety. We're largely successful in what we do with the manpower we have, but I can assure you there's been times that our efforts were hindered by our manpower. There was a period of time when Chief Larson had to make these brownout cuts during the course of the year. We had incidents during that period of time where damage was exacerbated tremendously by those engines and people not being in service on that day. So with that said, let's have this talk about what overtime is. I heard other, things that, live within it. We're not the rest of the world. We're not that deadline that needs to be met, so all right, boys, we're not going home tonight. We're gonna work, 5 hours of overtime this week and get it done. That's not the way they work. It's a shame that it's titled overtime, to be perfectly honest, because the majority of what it is staffing maintenance. If somebody, doctor, lawyer, for that matter, fire chief, gets hurt, they may miss a couple of days. You go get knee surgery, you might miss a week, you might miss a week and a half, and you're gonna be back to work. If a firefighter, a line firefighter, has that knee injury, they're gonna be out for 4 months. they're not coming back. The work we do does not allow it. You know, sprained ankles, broken wrists, those are different for us than they are for the rest of the world. We cannot perform that function. So those create the overtime situations. You couple with the vacation time that the department members have coming to them, personal time that they've earned, sick time, injury, it all compiles to overtime. The overtime is not extra. It's maintaining minimum manning on a daily basis throughout the year. That's what it goes to. Last year's a great example. I came to you for $100,000, well, I came to the selectmen for a $100,000 reserve fund transfer. You guys gave me 50, and you made it clear that there was no more there. If I ran out of that 50, you just didn't have it to give me. Now, timing coincided with it that we got healthy as I was spending down that 50. And I don't think I spent quite the whole 50. I think it was 48 and change. But that's just dumb luck. That's getting healthy at the right time. You know, I didn't change anything to make that 50 go further. That's just the way it worked. A couple of years before that, I heard another statement, which I'm frankly offended by. Don't give them the money, they'll spend it. I came to you guys for a $30,000 reserve fund transfer probably 2 years before that. We were in the heart of a was it 2? Yeah. You know, during the heart of a time where I had a bunch of people out, really unsure of when they were coming back, I told the committee that I don't think I'll need it all. What I don't spend, I'll return to you. Same thing, we got healthy earlier than I thought. I returned the whole 30. So that statement there, like I say, I'm offended by. I'm not asking you for things we don't need. Like I said, this is maintenance of our manpower. This will take fire apparatus off of the streets. And we're also talking about a contingent budget here. To put this out to the public and take that away from my department, you're taking public safety out of the voters' hands. You're taking their public safety away from them without their opportunity to speak for themselves. I'm not exaggerating this. You will not have fire protection on the street every day of the year. If we put it off, as the selectman said, we won't have it this year. You know, that's another thing. If we don't go there, we don't go there. And we'll make do somehow. But to say as a normal order of business that you're going to underfund us by such an extent that I have to come for reserve fund transfers, and I have to come for reserve fund transfers in an amount that I know you can't fund me, that's a dangerous practice. And we're going to get somebody killed. And I'm not a sky is falling person. I never have been. But we work in a business where people on my side of the aisle get hurt and people on the civilian side get hurt. And I've seen it when we run understaffed, bad things happen. And I'm going to say, you know, and this is just my opinion, but, you know, you signed on to more than you thought when you signed on to these committees here. Because I'm here to advocate for my department for public safety. Once you take the finances into your hands, it's out of my hands. I've done my job. So if you underfund it, to me, there's a moral obligation to you to make sure that you're providing a proper level of public safety. If not, when that tragedy occurs, and somewhere along the way it will, it might not be today, it might be 10 years from now, but if the ball started improper staffing here today, that's going to be on you guys. That's on your conscience. I promise you it will be on your conscience. Thank you for hearing me out.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Chief Grant? Yeah.
I certainly would. Thanks for coming in, Jack, and giving us your opinion. I think, and I certainly wish the Board of Selectmen were here instead of outside, but at any rate, so what you're telling us is never mind the contingent budget because that may come or go. You've got a problem this year.
I have a problem, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to note, although I do have another question for you, that last year, when there was some additional funding available beyond bare bones, your department did get about 50 grand. None of that was for overtime, but the Board of Selectmen signed off on that package of additional spending for town departments and did not raise a red flag saying, wait a minute, the fire department needs more overtime. That was last year, okay? So it wasn't a priority for them last year. We have to take a bit of a lead from what we see, okay? And I understand, obviously, that you think that overtime for the fire department is a much different funding mechanism than it is for any other kind of department. And I would presume that would include the police.
No, I don't know how the police operate with theirs, so, and I would assume that they are somewhat like us.
Okay.
So I would, no, I don't believe that would.
So they do have, as a percentage of funding, their overtime is about 6.5% of all their salary and wages. You're currently at about 5.8.
Mhm.
I think that if you were to go up to, it would only take about $35,000 to put you on an even percentage basis with the police department, okay, at 335. If you were to go to the full request, you'd be at about 9%.
Be that as it may,
and
the
so
expenditures, it's documented, Ted, it's there.
It's there. So what we need,
$420,000 five-year average of what it costs us to keep 11 men on the road. That it is what it is.
I understand what you're saying. I also understand that you've been able to fund that in some of the years past because of vacancies. If you don't have a vacancy, it should, in theory, take some pressure off that overtime number. Now,
Yes and no. I mean, we can't fund this big a gap with, this way, if somebody leaves, and I just did have someone leave in February, so I've got a little bit less than a half a year's salary to work with. So let's say $35,000, maybe 40. That's not gonna get us whole. I'm never gonna have enough people leave that are gonna give me that big, plus it also works against itself. When I leave, I have one less person. So every group is that much closer to minimum manning on a daily basis. And couple that with the fact that we've been spending that $420,000 average over that 5 years, and that's uncharacteristically low. There was 2 years of that period of time where we were operating on FY13 dollars rather than FY14 and $15. So the problem's larger than it appears.
Sounds like we need an override.
Whether you need an override or not, I need $110,000 for overtime. That's a quite frank statement. At that figure, what that does, it doesn't make us whole. Honestly, I think if we look at the end of this year, it's gonna be about where I asked, the 450.
It's about 448,000.
Yeah, it's gonna be there.
The estimate
But-
for this year.
What you were mentioning earlier, Ted, is my ability to spend that extra salary there. The personal aid buyback that's not used, that 110 puts me back into that range where I will have the ability to absorb what doesn't. But I truly believe, shy of 110, we're in trouble.
Anne Marie, Amy, do
And
you
it's
have
interesting to note as well, as Fire Chief Grant said earlier, the $300,000 that he has for overtime is predicated on the hourly wage for firefighters, lieutenants, and deputy chiefs. So there's an hour associated with how many hours you can get out of that $300,000. They just settled the collective bargaining agreement, as you all know, for 14, 15, and 16. And now that hourly rate is much higher, so that $300,000 worth of hours that he gets is substantially reduced.
Say that one more time.
Substantially reduced. The hours that he has of overtime money because of the collective bargaining agreement.
Because the cost of the replacing the person is up.
I mean, yes, sure, that makes sense, and if your wages go up 10% over 3 years or whatever it is, then yeah, a 10% increase to the overtime line certainly makes sense. But I guess part of the difficulty, I mean, we're all civilians here. Part of our difficulty is context, okay? Our knowledge is based on what we see in the town. We don't look at other fire departments. We're going to have to rely on you to bring us that information. What is the industry standard for municipal firefighters? Should it be 10% overtime?
Percentage-wise,
You know?
I don't know, but I can tell you out of the metro fire departments, and this is not this year's information, this is probably 2 or 3 years old. I did a study of departments within our size range, 10 above to 10 below.
Okay.
Out of the 12 departments that fit that criteria, we were in eighth lowest.
Of overtimes
8th lowest overtime expenditure out of 12 departments.
as a percentage of,
As a dollar figure.
as a dollar figure, okay.
The other thing that.
Yeah, we need to rework that, because if we
You
realize.
can rework it however you want, Ted. I'm stating facts here. We do not have enough. We've been underfunded for a long period of time, and that gap continues to grow. It is what it is.
This is why we need an override, I grant you. And,
But,
The other,
well,
can I
hold-
just?
Can I comment on that
and
first?
you're right.
This is why we need an override. You cut the money from the override, so how does that apply?
well, let me ask you this. I believe we were taken to task last night for having not put it in there, but then there's no support for the override. So how is it going to help your department either way? If there's a definite need that we don't perceive, okay, that we need to address, how are we going to address it in the current situation we're in? We have no extra money for non-contingent spending.
Exactly, and if there's no extra money in non-contingent, we have to deal with it. My big argument here is if you're going out contingent, and you're not gonna let the public have their say in it, that is wrong on so many levels, it's just unconscionable.
So we voted a recommendation to send to the Board of Selectmen, partly to elicit their opinion and find out if they were even going to support an override effort, okay? This thing isn't written in stone. We haven't voted the warrant yet. We haven't voted any article yet, okay? And I'm glad you came in and made your case. We'll probably,
Well,
might make an adjustment, right?
I hope I've made my feelings
we're not-
crystal clear, and I
You know,
apologize
this
for
is
losing my
the
temper
kind
a
of
little
thing,
bit,
you know,
but this
quibbling
means a lot to me.
You know, but quibbling about this kind of an item on an override effort that is completely ephemeral right now is kind of crazy.
Yes and no. At some point in time, be it this year or be it next year, this conversation will have to take place again. And
Well, we'll be better informed now.
And I think that's part of why I wanted to come up tonight, even if we're not doing an override, is we have to understand what an integral part overtime plays in our budget structure. It's not supplemental, it's in the heart of it. It's taking the place of 3 additional firefighters on each and every group. It's not paying medical benefits to them, it's not having pension obligations to them. That's in reality why we're structured the way we are. It would be $1 million over and above what we're talking about here to fund it a different way. And like I said, I just got the sense watching the meeting that there's a lack of understanding of why we have overtime and how I manage the overtime. I can assure you, I'm very conservative with how that overtime gets spent. It gets spent for necessary things. There's nothing frivolous about it, never has been.
Well, I'm glad you are helping educate us, you know?
I'll have this conversation every day as long as you want. Because, and I do, I've said it before, we speak a foreign language. You know, we're not, Emery and I have butted heads over issues because she can't comprehend the way we do things many times. And deservedly so. I should have to spell it out. And I'm willing to. Any day, any time, as long as you want. It's public safety. That's the thing, you know. I get paid the same. If you cut us to 40 people, and I did my best to prevent it, I'm gonna sleep good at night. Somebody's gonna get hurt, but I tried. I'm gonna sleep good.
Let me ask the warrant committee, are there others who have comments or observations, given the conversations that have gone back and forth at this point?
Yeah, I have a question. Regarding the overtime, does that have anything to do with your ambulance service, with the EMT service that you provide?
No. We don't provide the ambulance service, to clarify. Fallon's provides that privately. That came into existence in the late 80s, and we've been in a formal agreement with that we run as part of that service. Does that have a cost in overtime-wise? Absolutely not. It doesn't. It's all based on our minimum manning. It takes us 11 men to staff everything. And there's EMTs on every piece of apparatus, but they're there regardless. You know, there's not extra or less. They're there.
Okay.
Anyone else? We're going to probably take up the topic of voting non-contingent budgets on Monday and the what we want to do about a recommendation in the actual warrant itself. What we have in front of us here is our recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and I hear Chief Grant point about needing to recognize priorities, and certainly Anne Marie had identified this as a priority, and the warrant committee voted in a different way than her recommendation of $110,000 over non-contingent. Is there anybody that has any observation they want to make now about the recommendation that we have in front of us? You're happy to leave it here the way that it is?
Well, I think if we get some indication that pursuing a contingent budget or an override budget might have some traction, then yeah, we might revisit the numbers. And I think probably
Well, we're going to have to do that on Monday regardless, but what I'm saying is that what's in front of us is going to probably last as our recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and it may stop here, and we may vote a non-contingent budget on Monday. And so I just wanted to give folks the opportunity to adjust this if they wanted to. Michael?
Just one thing that came up in this discussion. I remember trotting out the fire report with the statistics on value of losses and stuff before. The reason for that is because I think that you can make better decisions with better data. And one of the things I heard is that we try to compare where we are with other towns. And that seems to be a very ad hoc kind of a thing. I mean, not with the fire, but with the police. I was trying to look and see what the level of staffing for police should be. And I had to go read like the town report of Brookline and Dedham, and it took a long time, and I gave up finally at that point. That's enough, you know. But there is, I think, I would like it if the town government here would like try to get some data, so that you wouldn't have to say, well, you went and looked for different fire departments to see what the staffing should be. So
I didn't look to see what staffing levels should be. I mean, there's plenty of international data on what they should be, which is, like I say, I could put study after study after study, and that's neither here nor there to show that. Safe bet that virtually every fire department in the country is saying the same thing, and it's true. And like I say, I'm not here for increased staffing.
I was going to try to give it to you, by the way. If you were watching carefully.
When the time is right, when the financial time is right, I'll be in here pushing for it. At this point in time, I'm just trying to keep our head above water and we had talked about the fire data last year. The problem with fire data is the staff on the Milton Fire Department is me. There's just, it's myself, it's the fire prevention officer, and it's Patty Ambrose, the administrative assistant. We don't have the staff to track that kind of stuff properly. So
Yeah.
you're right, it's very ad hoc.
Well, I hear the thing about the assistant town administrator. If you have somebody who's doing two jobs, it's very hard for
We'll
them
put that
to.
duty right in her or his job description tomorrow.
Well, it's like, almost like the roads. It's
Not
like,
to
can we
throw
spend
money-
some money to be smarter about something?
I was gonna say, not to throw money at somebody else's department, but I can quite honestly say I know how understaffed they are over there.
Okay, that's the whole thing.
Chuck?
Yeah, no, it's an absolute hole, but it's a hole that exists by necessity, because quite honestly, we're trying to provide public safety at a very basic, minimally adequate level. And things like that, Boston, New York City, larger departments will do very good studies because they've got such large staff rather than line personnel. And we're just never gonna be there.
Well, you did
Quite
better.
honest answer, we're
That
never
report was
gonna be
better
there.
this year than last year. I'm expecting, I have one more year on this committee, and I'm looking forward to a great one next year.
I think, Chuck, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to restore $110,000 to the contingent override budget in the
Second.
fire.
The motion's been made and seconded by Michael. Discussion? All those in favor? 3. All those opposed? 4, 5. The motion fails. Amy?
Sorry.
Were you voting?
No, I would like to make a comment, and I think maybe I should have made it before that vote.
We can always revote.
So, can I?
Yes,
yeah,
you may,
can I
of
comment,
course.
please?
Pull the microphone over just a little bit.
I came up here with Anne Marie and Chief Grant because I support everything he says. Anne Marie and I spent a lot of time working with the chief on, can we cut this? What could we do to make a reasonable number and keep your department intact? 2 comments. If you don't consider restoring the $110,000 or putting this overtime request in the contingent budget, what is your plan to fund it? Because last I looked, the reserve fund is $200,000. That is not going to go very far. Secondly, he's made it very clear he has a need. We don't fund that need. It's no longer unforeseen and unexpected because he's made it very clear he's going to need that money. That's a thin, very gray area when it comes to reserve fund transfer. Reserve fund transfers are for the unforeseen and unexpected. Does this now qualify as unforeseen and unexpected? Maybe unexpected, probably not unforeseen. So those are my comments from an accounting standpoint. One other comment. I believe in your non-contingent budget, your request was more than $300,000, and there was questions over the way the wage set-aside related to the fire contract being settled was spread throughout his department. So he made it clear in his non-contingent that he needed more, and I believe he was told to revise his budget back to what the 16 amount was. So
Correct.
those are my
Everybody-
comments for what they mean. I'm shaking inside because I know that he's passionate about his needs, and I just want to show my support. I see his actuals. I work with him on a day-to-day basis, him managing his budget. He's very fiscally responsible. He's frugal when he can be. He turns back money, which a lot of departments don't. He's not just going to spend to spend. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
And that was in deciding, I'm sorry, can I
Yeah,
speak?
sure.
In deciding to put the $110,000 in the contingent budget, that was part of my reasoning, was because the reserve fund transfer is for unforeseen and unexpected. We know, the last 5 years, it's been $425,000. We're on target this year for $448,000. To me, that's not unforeseen. We know it, it's there. So if we don't want to fund it in a contingent budget, let me throw out another little suggestion. I know the overlay came in higher this year, approximately 61,000. Maybe we could take that 61,000 and we could fund 60,000 in the non-contingent for overtime.
Okay, so, yes, the overlay reserve came in at 220,000, and we were depending on 160 of it, or maybe 164,000 of it, as the basic return, expected return from the overlay reserve, and we use that for operational purposes, and that's already baked in the cake. Anything above that, anything above 160 or 164,000, we would have to treat as one-time money. And funding overtime with one-time money would maybe not be a smart thing to do. The difficulty when you talk about spending 450,000, we don't see that immediately because you've funded it with other line items, okay? So you haven't, it's not that you were given 300, you spent 450 and you came to us for 150. You funded most of it with other line items and came to us for 50. So then the question is well, how are you able to do that in the past? And why can't you continue doing that in the future, you know? And I understand that, you know, as time goes by and your budget hasn't changed, there are more and more pressures on it, and so those other sources will dry up, and especially if one of them was a vacancy. So you're right. You know, now that you've made it plain, it is not. It's a size larger than the reserve fund can deal with, and it's certainly not unexpected at this point, and the Department of Revenue doesn't really like it if you fund things on a repetitive basis. But we only did 50 last year and 35,000 the year before. So in terms of reserve funding, it's not, you know, there's not a huge precedence there. One of the reasons I voted against this just now is because I'd always thought that you would ask for 150 in a perfect world, and probably 75 you could probably handle, especially since you handled last year with 50, okay? So that may be wrong, but I would, I'd make a motion to fund this item for 75,000.
Could I comment there? And I appreciate, and
Can I second that?
again, just
Yeah,
so
we'll say
we're
Chuck
understand.
seconded it, and then we'll do discussion,
On
and you
the-
can make a comment.
On the 50,000 last year, that was based on FY13 numbers still. Again, we've made a 3-year jump now,
Okay, that's 10%. That's, you know, 10%.
and we weren't there. You know, let's say, I mean, what are you going to give me for a reserve fund transfer this year, max dollar?
Who knows? If other things come up before you, then there might not be anything left
Or
in the
not even
reserve
before,
fund.
not even before, you know, because it wasn't all expended last time. It was just made clear that, look, there are going to be other needs beyond you. You're not going to be able to come back here. And
We
this
had a
is the
severe
point I'm
snow
trying to
and-
make.
We had a severe snow and ice situation last year.
Yeah, I know. My overtime should have been far larger last year. And that's an unfortunate thing there as well that I cut, and it's probably cut for good. You know, we've always staffed, and again, every department in these climates overstaffs during cases like this. We ran last year with our fingers crossed. And like I say, I have a sense that that's probably gone for good, and somewhere along the way, and there's a moral obligation that lies on me that we're not going back on that. And if something happens 10 years from now, because I cut funding during the winter, I'm going to own that. But that's something I sense is never going to come back, you know?
Let me hold the conversation. There's a motion on the table. Is there any other discussion from a warrant committee member?
I know I'm not warrant committee. I'm sorry,
Yes,
but
Amy.
I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. I need to support my department, one of the department heads.
Mm-hmm.
one more comment, and then I'll try to keep my comments to myself. You have a department head pleading with you for $125,000,
Not even.
150, which the town administrator, along with myself, along with the department head, along with, Anne Marie speaking with your Board of Selectmen, cut it down to where we thought he could handle. If we're talking contingent, why are you nickeling and diming him when you're funding these other departments? I just don't understand now why is it 75? Why isn't it 110? He needs 150. I just don't get it. You have facts, you have historical data. He spends on average $425,000 a year. And now we're cutting him.
I have to
I just
agree,
don't
and I was
understand
gonna
where the
close
thought
with that
is.
myself. I appreciate those, and I understand I'm out of order here too, but I have to say this, and then do what you wish. Thank you for the motion to restore the 110. Thank you to the people who voted in favor of it. Those that didn't vote in favor, I can't tell you how disappointed I am. I can assure you, I'm not over-exaggerating this, and the fact that this is just to put it out to the voters, and you're not willing to allow that to happen, I can't wrap my head around that at all. I can't tell you how disappointed I am in that.
All right, I
And-
think one of the reasons why they don't allow discussion in the middle of a of a vote is so that there isn't that pressure that is being applied right there. So, you acknowledge that you're out of order, and I understand that you're passionate, but there is a vote on the table. Are there any other warrant committee members that wish to make a comment? Phil?
What is the motion again?
$75,000 of funding for fire overtime, which would increase our overall contingent budget request or recommendation to the Board of Selectmen by $75,000.
In the contingent budget.
That's right.
My position all along has been, if this money is as needed as we're being told it is, we ought to be funding some or all of it under the non-contingent budget. I don't understand the rationale for funding overtime, increases in overtime through an override. I don't ever remember doing that.
I don't know where we would get the money to fund an operating line increase without doing an override on.
The fact is that it's a matter of choices. We didn't put this on the table for a choice because it came in the contingent budget.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is something that is a permanent need, then we ought to solve it on a permanent basis. And I don't like, when you pass an override, the money is fungible. It only goes for its original purpose the first year. After that, it gets thrown back into the mix, and it's reappropriated by this committee. That's why we don't normally do that. We don't go out for overrides to pay for more overtime on this budget or more overtime on that budget. We also, by the way, which bothers me, don't report it in the warrant as a separate line item for either the police or the fire, which we should do. Town meeting should know what we're spending on overtime for these budgets. So I think if this is a desperate need, then we ought to find a way to do it under the non-contingent budget. First of all,
I would greatly appreciate that.
but that wasn't an option. So now, but I understand we're gonna have to find it
Let me
somewhere.
correct you there. It was cut before it got to you.
Well, the one I have is the original proposal was 425 under non-contingent and 450 under contingent.
Yes.
So, but now we're talking more than that. So,
Well, No,
you asked him
you're
to
talking
cut it back to
300 on
300,000.
non-contingent.
okay,
In the
Yeah,
non-contingent.
so the 425 was requested.
yeah,
Okay.
I just want to clarify one thing.
yeah.
The fire department overtime budget has been stuck at 300,000 for years, okay? We requested level dollar general expense and just rolling forward salary and wages on all the budgets this year. When I saw the fire department overtime had gone from 300, where it had been, to 425, that was a problem, okay? Nobody else's overtime moved from 24,000 to 25,000 or from 400 to 402, okay? So to put all the departments on the same playing field, I requested that 125 be removed, okay? Because it wasn't part of a level service or, sorry, a level dollar request. And they did that. Now, the year before, it was at 300. We might have had an opportunity to boost it. It was not a Board of Selectmen or Town Administrator priority to do that, okay? We need to take, you know, a hint from somewhere. So now we had, so that's why it was 300 in the non-contingent. And it's been there for years. It should certainly go up with inflation. But here we are. Now, I'd be happy to have it in a contingent budget. I'd be happy to have it in a non-contingent budget, but it's above everybody else's, every other scenario in town in terms of what's in a non-contingent budget request. So,
Other discussion or comment on the motion? Again, it's $75,000 in funding for fire overtime, which would increase the overall override recommendation to the selectmen.
I'll give this a shot. Would you take a friendly amendment to make it 110? Based on the new testimony.
we just voted that down.
This is like reconsidering. Whatever, you can say no, fine.
Okay, anything else? All those in favor of the motion?
Chuck's motion?
Yes.
No,
It's
no,
Ted's
mine.
motion for
Oh, you seconded,
$75,000.
that's right, I'm sorry.
All those in favor of the motion for $75,000 increase to overtime? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed? 2. The motion carries.
Okay, this admittedly doesn't do 110, and it puts it into a non-contingent budget, which is what I'm hearing there's no support for.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, a
there's some now.
contingent budget.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I will say, if by chance it goes to an override and it passes, you have put me in the range, I would say, with the 75, that I will still be seeing you for reserve fund transfer, but it's probably within the range of something that you would give. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you, Chief Grant.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience that wishes to address their budget or department or have a comment? Contingent versus non-contingent? All right, well, I think we have a lot to think about then. We're going to come back together on Monday. We're not going to talk about articles tonight because I did not hear back from town attorney yet. So we're going to try to take that up on Monday as well. We'll come back on Monday to talk about non-contingent, and the Warrant Committee will hash out what we want to do in terms of making a contingent, possibly making a contingent recommendation in the warrant for town meeting to consider, which, as we heard from 2 of the selectmen tonight, they will probably weigh in after that point, but if we were to agree that the majority of us that is needed and it should go to town meeting, it sounds like we would have their support at that point. Motion? Yeah, Chuck?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.